are so many of us drawn to unavailable partners or bored by people who are available?
Someone who continually gets into a relationship with an unavailable partner and continues to pursue that partner despite red flags, despite them being unavailable, we have to dial it back and look at foundationally what is drawing them to that partner. Sometimes they're looking for a corrective experience, maybe looking for the validation or attention or approval that they didn't get in childhood. They have an abandonment wound, especially little girls. They'll go into fantasy, right? They'll go into like the fairy tales, and our culture feeds it, right? And make up what they think intimacy is. And what they're actually drawn to is that unavailable partner who has just quite the opposite attachment wound. For them, intimacy equals suffocation. So their idea when they meet this partner with these abandonment and wounds is that, oh, I can take care of you. I'm conditioned to do that really well. This plays out beneath the veil of consciousness, and they meet, and it's like intense and magical, but eventually that partner starts to distance because they feel suffocated, and that pattern tends to repeat.
And then you're saying they're drawn together?
Like moths to a flame. And they find each other, right? It's like a chemical thing. What's fueling it is intensity. I say they get into a relationship before really knowing each other. It's like zero to Velcro. They're in relationship. It's very serious overnight. And this is a structure. This is a framework that I present to people to help them organize their internal experience. What is going on for me? Because it feels chaotic internally. I don't understand it. And so I present the framework to my clients as a therapist, and they kind of like, yeah, I relate to this, but also maybe this. And it can look different for everybody, these concepts. So, but foundationally, um, it speaks to a lot of people.
Yeah. Tell me more about the framework.
Well, I was trained at the Meadows in Wickenburg, Arizona, which is one of the top treatment centers for trauma and addiction. And I was mentored by PM Melody and many other leaders in the field. And so the framework and foundation of that is codependency. And so when we're looking at cycles of toxic relationships, we're also having to look at codependency, right? And so that is the structure that I'm usually operating from, looking at a relational trauma. Different than shock trauma. Shock trauma can be mixed in, but relational trauma affects my sense of self and how I see myself and what do I expect from other people, and especially what do I expect from my partners, right?
Mm. That's good. I'm glad you brought up codependency because I was going to say how, that term gets thrown out a lot, and what does it actually mean?
Um, well, Pia Melody's definition of codependency is a disordered relationship with self,
Mm.
evidenced by struggling in the extremes of 5 core issues caused by childhood relational trauma. And so issues with self-esteem, right? Learning that my value, my worth is dependent on what I do or how I perform or my dress size or my status or whatever it is or whoever I'm comparing myself to. My boundary system, how I protect myself or not. Um, Reality is core issue number 3. It's about, am I authentic? Do I know who I am? Can I share that with other people? Do I feel defective? Am I allergic to my own humanity?
Mm.
Do I have to be perfect to be loved? Is that the message? Dependency is core issue number 4. How do I take care of myself versus what do I expect from other people to take care of for me? Um, and the last one is moderation. My issues with moderation or my issues with control, right? And so if I'm on either extreme of any of those core issues, I'm in my codependency, whether I'm feeling less than other people or better than other people, whether I have no boundaries or my boundaries are walls. whether I'm telling myself I'm a bad person or I have to be good and perfect, whether I have no needs, I'm never going to ask for any needs, I'm never going to take care of myself, right? Or if I'm expecting everyone to do everything for me, right? And if you can see looking in the extremes, and then the last core issue is I'm either out of control or I'm super in control, right? And that can look like everything's labeled, color coordinated, OCD. Sometimes I'm in control of myself and I'm also in control of everybody and everything around me, or I'm either out of control, right? With substances, my emotions, or spending, shopping, gambling, you name it. Like we can be out of moderation or out of control with anything. And so when you take those 5 core issues and then you put them in with a partnership with someone else, these patterns and seem to play out beneath the veil of consciousness. And then we get into um, relationship with someone else, and then they just kind of bounce off of each other, you know?
Great,
Then you
great.
get in co-addicted or codependent relationships, right? Because if I'm out of control, it might feel really good for somebody to be in control and tell me what to do, right? And if I feel less than, then somebody better than's probably gonna show up because I'm always going one down, right? So it's really kind of an organic, I call it root cause mental health.
Well, I like
Right?
that.
We're not just looking at addiction. We're not just, looking at the codependent patterns. We're looking at the root, what set it up. Was there enmeshment in my childhood? Was there abandonment in my childhood? Was there a lot of shame and criticism? We tend to parent ourselves the way we were parented. So that internal dialogue will will then start to run the show. Right? The unconscious conditioning tends to run my life at that point, right? The model that we use is called the PIT model, post-induction therapy. And that analogy is after the child has been induced, right? With whatever was going on in my family of origin. This doesn't always have to do with caregivers. Sometimes it's coaches, peer groups, other institutions. Um, but the analogy that Pia Melody used was if you take was an electrical charge. If you take an uncharged pole and you put a charged one by it, the uncharged one will become charged. So whatever is going on in the family of origin, and around that child when they're developing the sense of self becomes induced into the child. And sometimes that looks like toxic shame or these codependent patterns and these strategies that we use to cope in childhood end up kind of, hurting us later in adult relationships because they don't tend to work. So,
Yes. Yes, that's very relatable. Yeah, big part of my journey when I was getting sober, and I wasn't just looking at alcohol. I wound up, really going under the veil and seeing, what were some of those patterns that I was unconsciously, bringing into adulthood that
mm,
were stemming from my childhood. And it's amazing how I just had no idea for many, many years that certain reactions I was having or certain behaviors in situations were actually being dictated by those childhood issues around abandonment and things like that. So I like to say that when I went on my sobriety journey, it was really kind of an overall healing journey because it forced me to look at those things and it revealed them in the process.
yeah, I mean, I remember, we've talked about my 30-year yoga journey, but when I started working at the Meadows, I was heavy into a yoga practice, but I would leave yoga with like kind of anxious and tension in my jaw. And once I learned about these concepts, Pia Melody quizzed me once in supervision. She's like, "Tell me how you understand the model." I'm like, "I'll tell you how I go through my codependency in an hour-long yoga class." And she's like, "Okay, let's hear it." And I said, "Well, I come into the room and I'm comparing myself to everybody in the room. I'm either going one up or one down, one down to the super fit person who's standing on their head, one up to the bodybuilder who thinks this is gonna be easy, and I'm timing, like, when's he gonna lay down, one up and one down. Um, Boundaries, right? So if somebody's got their mat too close to me, I'm, like, not moving it, or if there's sitting right in front of me where I can't see my alignment in the mirror, I'm resentful the whole class, right? Question number 3, reality. If I'm trying to be good and perfect, right? If that shows up in my balancing postures, I'm trying to hold a balance posture for a whole minute. And if I wobble out of it, who saw me being imperfect, right? Dependency, I would go through, a whole hot yoga class and maybe not lay down or take a break or drink enough water. And the room could be spinning, but am I going to lay down? No, nobody's gonna think I'm weak, right? Or I can't do it. I'm not gonna take care of and honor my body. And course number 4, moderation. I could be very out of moderation with my practice, maybe even to the point of self-injury. No wonder I was walking out of that class. I didn't even know I was doing it. Uh, until I learned about these unconscious patterns that were just playing. What it does is it affects your quality of presence, your ability to be in the here and now, be connected to yourself, to show up authentically, to be just an imperfect human, and just I need to lay down, so I'm gonna lay down. I'm no better than anybody or not less than anybody in the room. Just being connected to yourself and showing up authentically. So it changed my yoga practice for sure. So that can show up at work. That can show up in your friendships. And so, when I really learned about the model, it really gives people, I think it empowers people to, right? Because if there's somebody coming in who feels like, I don't know what's wrong, I don't know why I'm so miserable, I can present the structure, right? And it helps them organize their internal experience. Like, my goal for my clients is, as they're moving through their day or with their work or partners or whatever, they can pause and self-reflect. Like, do I need to set a boundary right now? Am I out of moderation? Do I need some self-care? The ability to just check in with myself and to self-assess is very empowering. And so I really the model that they used there really spoke to me in a very, and applied it personally. So, um, yeah, really kind of elevated recovery and
Yeah.
does for a lot of people.
Yeah. I think that's kind of the bonus of us working in the field of helping other people with mental health and things like that, because we have to model it, and as we're learning these practices and these skills and about the 5 core issues that you mentioned, we get to put it in practice in real time, and then we get to also then help our clients even better.
Yeah. 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 I mean, it's hard to take people where you haven't been sometimes. So it's helpful to always kind of do your own work,
Yeah.
and it's encouraged, I think, with a lot of therapists, especially the people that I've worked with.
Yeah. Love that. So I wanted to bring up your book, by the way. We've got it out right here. It's called Love Addiction to Awareness, a recovery workbook. So I had a question from your book, because I did look through it, and it's really good. I'm so glad you have this book out. It's very exciting because I know it came out this year. So in the book, you're clear that love addiction is a pattern, not a diagnosis. So what is happening in the body when that pattern takes over?
Well, in the initial stage of love addiction, and another term for that is just an anxious attachment, right? Is right, that initial stage we talked about before, fantasy. I project that fantasy onto a partner, and the initial stage of a relationship is not just butterflies. It's butterflies on steroids. It's very intense, and the euphoria and the I think in the body, the oxytocin, the euphoria, the sometimes adrenaline mixed in with that from that fantasy stage, um, is kind of addicting, right? A lot of people get addicted to the initial stages of the relationship, which is special and powerful, and it should be, right? I'm not saying that's bad, but when that initial stage kind of softens and it's not as intense and we're in real life, um,
Right.
a lot of people get bored or want to go chase another um, in new relationship. They get addicted to the intensity of the initial stages of the relationship. Um, yeah, and we tend to play out our childhood roles, right? If I was, um, we use 3 childhood roles mostly at the Meadows. Um, one of them is the lost child. It's like um, the child that needs to be seen, but it's not safe to be seen. Right? Or so I learned to disappear or hide to stay safe. Those are strategies, right? That's a strategy a child uses. Um, and there's the heroic role where um, I learned that my role is to be on a pedestal, to be the caretaker, to be the good and perfect one, to be the one that takes care of everybody and everything. Hopefully one day I'll get that reciprocated, right? That's not pathology, that's a survival strategy. Because if I'm not being good and perfect, if I'm not being the hero, then I'm nothing, right? Or things aren't going to be okay. Then there's that scapegoat role, the problem. My role in the family is to be the problem. I'm the one that's the squeaky wheel, the usually the truth teller in the family, the scapegoat's usually the first one to get treatment. Then you have your mascot role, and my role is to make light and make jokes and make everything funny, right? Which is kind of that heroic role. So those strategies and adaptations are not diagnoses. Those are survival strategies that maybe are playing out in my adult life with my partner, um, or at work or with my friendships that might not be so effective, right, later on. But so I don't see it as a diagnosis or pathology. I see it as adaptive survival strategies that we learned early on that are no longer working. And so I think recovery looks like being mindful of the present, in the present moment of any kind of wounding that's being triggered and any kind of strategy that's old and outdated and maybe needs an update,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. No, that's perfect because I was actually gonna ask, your book also points out that, people aren't broken, that their patterns aren't flaws, that they are survival strategies that were keeping them safe. And then, so how does that shift of realizing that, taking it from a reframe of it being a flaw to no, it's a survival strategy. How does that change the healing process?
Right. And so if I'm walking around in the world thinking that I'm broken, right? That's not helpful. I'm never going to shame myself into recovery, right? Recovery um, come from a place of compassion, from a place of loving kindness. My recovery voice is an encouraging voice, right? Um, and if you think about the strategies that we adapted as children to survive whatever we were going through, it does feel like, I'm broken or I can't maintain a relationship or a job, sometimes for some people. Um, but also, there's this thing called post traumatic growth where, you know, that heroic child, that child that learned to be good and perfect, became so successful as a physician or a doctor or a lawyer and very successful in their adult life because they learned how to be really effective, right? But also they have a hard time being vulnerable and with their partner. So there's some vulnerabilities and there's some strengths. I think there's a lot of strengths in some of these roles that sometimes get overshadowed and pathologized. But the idea is to come into the center, come into moderation. And we call that our functional adult. We're not living in our adaptations, which is kind of a younger ego state, right? Um, like we call it adaptation as kind of our teenager state, and our wound is kind of what hurts. And then I adapt with these strategies that I learned a long time ago. My functional adult is kind of the one that pauses and self reflects like, what do I need right now? What's going on for me right now? Why am I, you know, at a 10 of activation, right? If there's that old saying, if it's hysterical, it's historical. So if my reaction to something is out of 10, maybe I'm in a trigger and I need to
Yeah.
kind of pause and reflect.
Yeah. That reminds me. So I teach my clients noticing this, that from Dr. Bessel van der Kolk's The Body Keeps the Score, so that they can notice that they're even at a 10, or really like what's going on in the body first. There's things happening in the body, in the nervous system, and then it's this like bottom up communication goes into a feeling, and then it creates a story.
And to be able to identify that, they have to go in and connect with themselves. Well, they may have disconnected for a reason.
Mm.
And that's why maybe getting sober or getting into recovery might be really difficult. People don't want to face the pain, which is often the reason they disconnected. So sometimes just naming their emotions, naming like if I'm asking what do you need right now? I have to connect with myself and be able to identify that. If, what do you feel? I have to go in and connect with myself. Where did you learn that message? Again, I have to, right? It's like people that come in with the depression. What does it mean? Like, what's the root of that word? To depress means to push down. So a lot of these wounds, right? Relational trauma gets pushed down over time, and then it I've heard it called the pain body. It just leaks out, and you can feel it with some people, um, that really have been avoiding themselves for a long time. So it's I always give kudos to anybody who's willing to sit in the
Mm.
chair and do that journey because it's not easy.
Yeah.
It's not easy.
Wow. Yeah, I love how you describe depression and the layers and it depressing and it getting pushed down. That's very relatable.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
that's what I love about the work is it's, Pia Melody said codependency is just the human condition. Like, what does it look like for you? I mean, unless you had a unicorn upbringing. I mean, I don't really know many people that did, but, um, there are some people that had it good enough. Your caregivers don't have to be perfect. Just needs to be good enough, right? Um, yeah, but things happen. Life is hard.
Oh, I wanted to talk about modern technology. And, so people are self soothing on their cell phone. And now we've got AI companions that are offering the deep connection, or what feels like deep connection without the vulnerability. And, is that the same kind of move as love avoidance? And, what is leaning on that connection with an AI companion? What is it going to do to our capacity for connecting with a real person?
Ugh. You know, um, there are so many things that keep us disconnected. This one is a big one. Um, yeah, I mean, it's convenient. It's in your pocket. It's available whenever. You don't have to deal with another human being, or maybe you're just frustrated by and stressed and want a kind of quick hit of dopamine. We've got to think about, dopamine and connection and being connected to myself. And if I can get a small hit of what feels like connection with a device, um, and really, I think that's more about dopamine. I mean, we're neurobiologically made to connect with other people. When we're not connecting, there's a lot of adrenaline, cortisol, really stress hormones in our body. And if we have all of these codependent patterns or Survival strategies are interfering with our ability to connect, even to connect with myself. There's a there's one thing I learned is maintaining your 50-50. I'm 50% connected to myself and 50% connected to you. If I can't maintain the 50-50, I might jump all the way into you, and then I feel depleted and resentful, right? So that's what connection is, but if I'm leaning on a device, I feel like it's more about dopamine, and it's not really authentic connection. So oftentimes I feel like if I can't connect with myself, how am I gonna connect with someone else? And so looking at that holistically and in our culture and, um, you know, I worry, I worry about the youth and these devices and what it's doing to human connection in general and relationships, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, we've already been outsourcing our attention, which, is so critical to our well-being. And now if we outsource connection to, a robot or a device, to me, I almost look at it like it would be like if we stopped eating real food and just ate processed junk food every day for the rest of our lives. You can survive on processed junk food, but you're not going to be healthy,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
When I look at something like recovery from alcohol is something that you can actually remove from your life, and you can go about your life and live it, um, and walk away from it completely. But when it comes to relationships or food or your own need for connection, you can't quit that. So how do you recover from something that you can't just completely remove from your life?
Mm. Well, sometimes we need help. Usually, um, changing the way we're thinking about ourselves and other people, changing the way we're navigating our relationships. Sometimes, if it's really unhealthy, I'm really having a hard time relationally with other people, um, you know, therapists, 12-step meetings. There's one called Adult Children of Alcoholics and Other Dysfunctional Families that really helps with childhood relational trauma. I you know, I always recommend podcasts, recovery podcasts. I used to have
Mm.
when I ran group for years, I would have an ongoing list of recovery-based podcasts just to hand out. What you're trying to do is change your programming, your conditioning, the way you're thinking. And if I can change the way I'm thinking, then I can change my emotions. If I can change my emotions, then I can change the way I'm receiving other people or giving to other people. So relationally, it's like a very holistic way to think about it. It's just like, um, you know, we're looking a lot of times at shame, right? And you mentioned food, right? If I'm not giving myself the proper nutrients because I feel like I want my body to look a certain way or I have shame about my body. So I'm depriving myself of really healthy food and food in general. Um, I'm doing that from a container of shame, right? From a container of deprivation. It's not really compassion or self-love. If I'm figuring out how to eat healthy and nourish my body really well and to take care of myself because I want to be healthy and the best version of myself. I want to feed my cells what they need to be, the best. And that's from a place of self-care, self-love. Right? So looking at how are you holding your sense of self and bringing that into the relationship. And some people, right, if they're just having some minor kind of hiccups relationally, they can probably just navigate things with some really good books and podcasts and 12-step groups or whatever and some healthy kind of relating. But if there are more toxic things going on, I might need to look at, you know, talking to somebody who can help me work through it. That mirroring, that reflect. If you think about a healthy childhood and a healthy attachment, you have that co-regulation and that healthy mirroring um, from a caring caregiver, a caring adult, or a caring teacher or coach who's encouraging you, not shaming and criticizing. So You wanna, like, kind of like I said before, you're never gonna shame yourself into recovery, right? And some people get so frustrated, they will isolate and do their best not to, um, interact with people, and some people feel really isolated and lonely even if they're in a group of humans every day. They can feel very alone. And I heard a definition once of shame or toxic shame as a deep sense of alienation, not only from yourself, but from other people. And you can feel very alone even when you're surrounded by other people. So it's really finding someone to work through that and really get to the truth of who you are, right? That maybe went offline somewhere in childhood or because of trauma or how you were parented or neglected.
Yeah.
Um, just depends, right? But yeah, I think there are solutions.
Yeah. It seems like a recurring theme that keeps coming up is that holding that sense of self and being connected to yourself and that sense of authenticity.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, that's what gets lost and taken offline. Like, who did I have to be? Right? To survive
Yes.
or to get by, I had to be a super athlete because that was meeting the need of someone in my family, or I had to be this. I had to be the secret keeper. I had to be right. And what gets lost in that is self. So I've worked with people who would come in and they don't really know who they are. They don't know what they like, what they need, what they want. um, what their values are because they've been often living their life by who they had to be, right? Who they were told they were, right? So I think that authentic part is there. It just needs to be uncovered. It just got buried with survival strategies sometimes. So kids are resilient though, and they'll figure out a way to get their needs met. And sometimes it's not really healthy.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, I like how you explain that. And to me, when we have to, it's like we're role playing. So it's like we're in a play, and we're playing the role of the perfect child or the mascot or the other roles you mentioned, and we can't find our authentic self because we're too busy doing these behaviors, and it's a survival strategy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a and I think we talked about before, like having that identity crisis when we retire or when I learn that who I am is what I do, right? Or I would work with people who were successful in their own right, or a doctor or a lawyer or executive, and they're like, I always wanted to be a musician or an artist, but I had to do this, because this is what was valued in my family, or I don't know who I am. I just know I hate this, right? I don't. So it's really a journey. I think it's a journey to back to self, back to reconnecting,
Oh, I love that. A journey back to self. Yeah, that's.
and it can be painful.
Oh my
Just
gosh.
that reconnection, having to
Mm.
unface all of the reasons we disconnected.
Oof.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and to process it. It's like a purge.
Yeah.
It's a good purge.
Oof. Yeah. Not for the faint of heart.
Yeah, it's a shame purge, a toxic shame purge.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Earlier, you were talking about fantasy and reality. So there's actually a word that is interesting. It's come out, limerence. So more and more people are talking about limerence, that it's this obsessive, idealized, can't stop thinking about them state. What's the difference between limerence and love, and how do you tell?
Limerence, I mean, you said it's obsession. It's like fantasy. It's like, that sounds like, and our culture feeds it. I mean, if you think about all of these shows, The Bachelor, Love Island, even the fairy tales when we're young, and all of the things, you have like a damsel in distress, and you have this rescuer, and you have this fantasy. And if you pile that on to some abandonment and enmeshment and issues, then you have all of that elevated, and you're not able to see the real human on the other side of the coin, right? If I get into fantasy and I'm projecting that, that's in a way that's objectifying your partner. You're taking a fantasy and you're putting it on another human being, and that's then I get into denial around who this person is,
Mm.
right? And despite any kind of evidence or data that's in front of me telling me the contrary, I'm so into this fantasy and I don't really know the human that I'm in relationship with. And that can be a little bit dangerous, right?
Yeah.
If I'm I'm dating a projection. So the withdrawal from toxic relationships or love addicted relationship is withdrawal from a fantasy, because often we're pulling apart, if I have a client with me and they're in withdrawal from a relationship, I'm like, yeah, but your values weren't aligned and you didn't like all of these major qualities about this person. Like, what are you grieving? Is it the fantasy or is this person that we've been talking about for 3 months that you couldn't stand, but now that you're broken up, you're grieving, right? And it's not a one size fits all, but yeah, the fantasy can be dangerous, you know, for many reasons. Um, 'Cause you wanna be in reality of who the person is that you're with. You wanna be able to see red flags and say, "Nope, we're not aligned," or "This is outside my value system," or "This is not congruent with this behavior isn't congruent with who they say they are." But if I'm in denial, so I don't have to face the reality of who this human is, I can end up in a relationship for a long period of time that can become super toxic.
Mm.
Um, and I'll minimize and make excuses and do all of the things because the withdrawal from the relationship or from the fantasy is too painful. Um, so yeah, fantasy is a slippery slope. It's okay to have butterflies, but I want to be in reality, grounded in reality about who my partner is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think a lot of conflict in relationships from what I've observed is like, you have two people and then they think one person thinks they can change the other,
Hmm.
and that's just not realistic.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. They get, and where did that sense of I can change you come from? And fantasy
Right.
goes on both ends, not just for, um, the person with the anxious attachment. Their fantasy is, "You're the one, you're gonna take care of me, you're gonna rescue me, you're gonna be my you're gonna make me happy, you're gonna be my source of all the you're all the things."
Yeah.
For the person on the other side of that coin, I am the person that can take care of you. I learned how to do that really well. I am the answer. I am the rescuer because I learned to do that a long time ago. I had a gentleman come in and he had never heard of any of this. And he said to me, he's like, "Why do I always end up with women who need to be rescued in some way?"
Ugh.
And then he said, "And then I get disenchanted after a while." And when I hear the word enchanted or disenchanted, I'm like, well, that's because you fell out of fantasy about the rescuing and you got overwhelmed by this person's needs, right? Because they have an unrealistic expectation of what this partner is going to take care of. And then the partner gets overwhelmed. The person with the anxious attachment will often create the abandonment that they fear the most because they place these unrealistic expectations on their partner. And then the partner picks it up, and then they start to feel this is too much. This I'm being suffocated. I can't go out with my friends. I can't be myself. I'm always taking care of your emotions and all of the things. My job is to be the one. And that feels, especially for someone who was enmeshed in childhood, overwhelming, suffocating, and what happens is the avoidant person will create intensity outside the relationship to keep some distance, right?
Hmm.
And that can look like substances, it can look like workaholism, it
Oh,
can look like, um, extreme sports, adrenaline, or something that's intense outside. The
yeah.
person who is the anxiously attached will create the intensity inside the relationship to hotwire that connection, right? And that can look like love bombing, negative love bombing, negative intensity bombs, or positive intensity bombs, like dramatic displays of emotion and long dramatic conversations, or just, you know, it could be really toxic, or it could just be more subtle, but intensity drives everything on both ends. Dramatic um, reconnections and dramatic breakups, and then the push pull, right? When you get into these dynamics, that's the intensity that we're talking about in co-addicted relationships.
Wow. Yeah. Interesting. So I want to talk about boundaries. Setting a boundary can feel like it's putting the connection with that person at risk. What does a boundary look like in the body so that it doesn't register, let's say, as abandonment?
Mm. Boundaries are tough for a lot of people, myself included. I'm not immune to any of this stuff. I think where a lot of people get boundaries mixed up is they often think boundaries are what the other person's gonna do, right? My boundary is you're not going to drink anymore. My boundary is, um, whatever it is, right? And it's usually focused outward. And whenever I'm working with someone on codependency, we're always shifting it back to self, right? That connection to self. So boundary is about what I'm going to do if this continues. It's about self-compassion. It's about, okay, if you continue to do this, this is what I'm going to do to take care of myself. It's not a punishment. It's not, retaliation. It's not meant to disconnect. It's meant to keep me safe so I can stay in relationship with you, right? My boundary could be I'm going to leave the room, or I'm going to take a few days, or I'm going to leave the conversation if this continues. But that subtle shift back to the self, right, is always the flex when we're doing codependency work. Is because I've heard this analogy before. It's like when you're disconnected from self, you're always looking outward at what other people are doing, what the scenario is out the window instead of in the mirror. Okay, that's fine that you're looking at the data outside of you, but what are you telling yourself about it, right? And when you're doing boundary work, especially the internal emotional boundary, what keeps my psychology safe from your psychology is when somebody's sharing something with me, they're telling me who they are, right? I already know who I am. You're telling me who you are. And I get to decide whether I want to take that in, right? And say, yeah, I agree with that, or that's true for me, or no, I'm going to push that back off, right? So keeping my psychology safe from your psychology. And so if I don't have that internal kind of shield or protection, and I just maybe take everything in. Everything you say, I'm taking in, and that keeps me in a very reactive state. But if I can have that subtle kind of like, that's like a little pause where I'm able to say, yeah, that's not true for me. And wow, the way you're acting right now is really telling me who you are, but and it's not about me. And so if I have a really healthy boundary, I can say, wow, that's given me some important data about this. I'm not being respected, or I'm not, you know, otherwise I'm always taking it in, like, and making it about myself.
Mhm.
So, um, boundaries can be a superpower
Yeah.
if you can get them online. When we all can slip with our boundaries from time to time, and you have your physical boundaries, your sexual boundaries, and your internal boundaries. And if you have no boundaries, right, you can just be taking everything in and being overwhelmed by everyone all the time,
Mhm.
right? Keeps you super in that reactive state. Or you could have walls for boundaries and you're not taking anything in. You're not able to take any feedback in. You're not able to share either. right? It's reciprocal. So if I have no boundaries, I'm taking everything in and I'm letting everything out. I'm the person telling you my life story on the plane. I'm the person, jumping into a relationship, telling you trauma dumping on the first date or whatever. I'm letting everything out and also letting everything in. And that's not a good place to be. And on the other side of that is I let nothing out and I let nothing in. And that's very isolating. We may have a lot of walls for boundaries.
Mm.
We tend to kind of turn in on ourselves, and that can look like self harm and that really deep lack of connection. Um, and so on either side of that extreme, right? When we're talking about codependency, we're looking at the extremes of those 5 core issues. What we want to do is like be in the center, in the moderate middle. Like, yeah, I'm able to take some stuff in and keep stuff out. It's like this flex. It's like, it's like a flexible boundary system that I'm able to discern what I can take in and keep out.
Right.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's empowering to be able to take that pause and back people off, right? Um, yeah, and it can keep my nervous system super dysregulated.
Oh,
Think
yeah.
about the isolation that comes with walls, the adrenaline, the cortisol, the stress when I'm not connecting. Think about the adrenaline and cortisol and stress that's going on when I'm taking on everything and being reactive. So it's not healthy for my body either.
Yeah.
My nervous system can be really dysregulated if I live in those extremes of any of the core issues.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Wow. So, in your training, there's something called a talking boundary. Can you tell my listeners what that is?
Yes. I mean, I ran group for a very long time, and we would have people talk in the talking boundary when they're giving feedback to their peers. And the talking boundary helps me work on my boundaries. It helps me work on connecting to my reality, my thought reality, and it helps me connect to my emotions. So it has 3 parts. It's the data. The data is just what I heard you say or what I saw, right? The data is the data. When I heard you say this to me, right? When I heard you say you weren't coming home for dinner, right? Um, Usually that second part is the thought, right? So you have the data, you have the thought, and the emotion. Those are the 3 pieces. Okay, so the data is when I heard you say, "You're not coming home for dinner," my thought is, "You're a jerk." That's me looking out the window instead of in the mirror. Okay, if I'm in group, I wanna know, okay, but what do you tell yourself about the data from the I perspective, right? Okay, we'll go back around. When I heard you say you weren't coming home for dinner, my thought was, "I'm not valuable." And then you get to the emotion, right? I'm always looking for the least common denominator, and I wanna keep the talking boundaries simple and very specific. Is putting a laser beam on how I'm creating my reality,
Mm.
right? And so about that, I feel pain. And the last part about that is I'm not gonna say that made me feel, right? I'm not gonna say that because there's a little codependent hook that makes you responsible for how I feel, where I went with that, right? So
Right.
so if they're saying that I'm not valuable, I'm gonna challenge that. So I wanna understand how they're organizing their internal experience. They could they're taking in data and they're falling into their wound. Well, where did you learn you're not valuable, right? They're telling you who they are. It gives me, as a therapist, a point to kind of inspect, like, we're looking for patterns of behavior, patterns of communication, emotional patterns. It's just like getting your blood work done. Your physician's going to look for trends to pathology.
Mm.
If I'm listening to your emotional patterns, the way you're speaking about yourself and the way you're interacting with someone else, this is a really good dissection tool for me so I can reflect that back and start to challenge maybe a negative core belief that's been there for 20 years that I'm then enacting with my partner or my peer or my friend. I'm like, "Oh, that person has a lot of power if they tell you you're not valuable, right? Like,
Yeah.
because they aren't coming for dinner, that's where you went? How long's that message been there?" And then, "Well, it's been there since I was 5." I'm like, "Okay, well, what was going on when you were 5?" "Well, that's when my dad left," or that's when whatever.
Right.
Um, and then we can get to the truth. Okay, so what's the truth? Where can we rework this? And I might write it on the board, always have a big whiteboard. Let's rework it. Let's okay, the data's this, and so what's the truth? The truth is, I'm still valuable. It's just maybe I don't feel respected and I'm annoyed or I'm angry. Maybe it's a boundary violation. Okay. I could see it being a boundary, right? So you can see the structure coming through to help them reorganize how they're experiencing this relational dynamic. And that's powerful to work with as a client. It's empowering for them to be able to take that tool and dissect for themselves. And it's empowering for me as a therapist to help them kind of restructure that and get into maybe the truth, right?
Yeah.
So the talking boundaries, 3 parts: data, thought from the I perspective, and emotion. What am I telling myself right now? There are other ways you can use it, but that's for the most part how I use a talking boundary in group. Do I expect people to talk like that with their partners? Maybe not. It's a little awkward and clunky when I
Yeah.
heard you say what I thought about that and about that I feel. M- But I want you to think like that. What we're doing is we're creating space between, right, and space for me to kind of self reflect, to maybe challenge my own thought, my own emotion. Like, what's this really about? What is this triggering for me from my past? Oh, it's triggering that old abandonment stuff from when I was 5. Oh, the
Yes.
truth is my partner does care about me and he's just having a hard day. And so if I can restructure that, then I can change how I'm feeling about it and I can change my reaction. That's super empowering.
Yeah, and you keep bringing up, like, the pause. I love that. That's so important for my work with my clients. They have to notice these things happening in their body, and they have to pause. So, I had, like, a little personal story I wanted to share. So, I was raised by my mom and my grandma, and they were both single mothers, and, by the time I was 12, I was dealing with some abandonment issues. And I decided that, okay, I can't rely on a man. So I had this plan at 12, like, I'm going to get straight A's, I'm going to get a scholarship to college, and I'm going to create this great life.
Mhm.
But then I met my now husband at 15.
You met him when you were 15?
Hmm.
Oh, that's so
Yes.
cool.
Yes. 28 years of being in love. It's amazing. But it just, so I was totally proven wrong, which is really funny in hindsight. So for somebody who's been kind of building their life around the idea of not needing anyone, what makes it possible to let love in?
Hmm. Well, I mean, I think what makes it possible, I mean, most people do want that. They do want that deeper connection, a partner, and I think it's really like just focusing on these ideas around I have it all. I'm the general manager of the universe. I have this figured out. I'm going to be single forever and not need anybody because it's not safe to need anybody. Um, yeah, and that was what was modeled. That was what was conditioned for me. And then the universe had other plans.
Yeah.
So, uh, yeah, I mean, that sounded like, the higher power had other plans for you. And it takes some humility, right? We talked a little bit about humility before
Hmm.
to kind of take my own inventory and look at my own messages and you can build a wonderful life with just lovely friendships and pets and work relationships and all of that without that romantic partner. Um you can that can be done as well. So to allow it in, I've I've worked with people that had been in these toxic cycles and then had done enough work and then on the other side of it gotten into a relationship that was everything they said they wanted while we were going through all the toxic stuff. And I was like, wait a minute. You're telling me you're bored now. And this is everything you said you ever wanted in a partner. The values are there, the respect is there, the fidelity's there, the everything's checked. You're getting a little bit bored. What do you think that's about? Oh, you're right. I got a letter, you know, 6 months later, we're getting married. I had to lean into that slow burn of
Mm.
that longer break because intimacy isn't just the beginning stage. It's like being with a person despite their humanity sometimes. It's despite right, being in truth of who the other person is, and people aren't perfect. And so that's what real intimacy is getting to the other side of, like, when that initial stage falls off and you're just being human struggling in the world and seeing all the good, bad, the ugly, and the beautiful all at once. That's what makes real intimacy it. But again, people get stuck in those really high dopamine stages of that initial relationship. And again, it's being programmed in our culture with the media that we're consuming and all of the quick hits of dopamine from our devices and everything that feeds into the those big rushes, the big highs, and that's not what long-term connection typically looks like.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
There
true.
it's a little bit like this, you know?
Yeah, exactly, riding those waves.
Yeah.
Yeah. So something that you shared with me really stuck with me. It was we can't think our way into healing any more than we can exercise our way out of unresolved emotional pain. For a listener who's tried one of those and kind of stalled, what does working with both the mind and the body look like?
Mhm. I always encourage, people to find something that helps soothe their nervous system, especially while we're doing this work. I mean, yoga was my thing, right? And that's not everybody's thing. Sometimes it's just being in nature or finding a good body worker. And I've tried a lot of different things for myself: chiropractic, body workers, craniosacral work, yoga, acupuncture, anything that helps bring that chronic state of tension that a lot of people operate in down to where you feel relaxed, your shoulders don't feel like they're pinned to your ears. You taking some deep breaths, you're able to sleep and regulate your nervous system. You're not, if I'm struggling with chronic anxiety and panic, right? Okay, well, how about we not drink Red Bull and venti Starbucks all day and watch CSI at night? That might not be helpful. So again, you're working with behavior, you're working with if you're living in codependency, that's gonna and toxic relationships, that's gonna increase adrenaline. If you're taking in substances or too much caffeine or whatever that's causing maybe some overactivation of your nervous system. I like to look at very holistically what is feeding this pattern in our nervous system. And sometimes if we have complex PTSD or very traumatic histories, especially from childhood, our outer world will reflect our inner world. So if my nervous system is overstimulated and not regulated all the time, the outer world might reinforce that in maybe the activities and the people that I'm with and the media that I'm consuming. Wanna look at everything, right? So what am I putting in my body? What am I consuming? What relationships am I in? And what am I doing for self-care? It's like challenging patterns that aren't serving you. What are you willing to give up and shift? And everybody's unique in their experience, but sometimes when our neurochemistry gets wired up in childhood because of trauma or whatever was going on, I mean, life is difficult. we have shock trauma, we have relational trauma, and the way the patterns in our nervous system developed. What if my caregiver was anxious, right? And that sense of fear got induced into my little body. And so what wires together what fires together wires together, right, in my nervous system. So w- oftentimes I'll bring that pattern and look for what's familiar in my current life. So if I was wired in anxiety, I might, be in a I could, for some people it's like, what do I do for work? If I'm a police officer, or an EMT, or a trauma surgeon, I'm like, where did your nervous system get set up for that sometimes? So
Yeah.
it's like, mm, again, that can be my strength and my vulnerability, depending on how I'm self care and moderation. I don't always want to pathologize, you know, um, some of the trauma that happens actually creates resiliency on the other side. So, just looking at what's working in your patterns and what's not, what you can shift, right? If I did I was a traumatized child and then I work in the trauma industry, what do you do? I hope you have a really good self care routine going on, you know, so you could see a lot of burnout.
Oh, definitely. Anything you want to share about your book before we wrap up?
The workbook is just a compilation of a lot of the theories and ideas from many different realms of therapy throughout my journey as a therapist. And I usually use it with my clients and to help them kind of create some awareness around their patterns. What were their childhood rules? And it has some relationship mapping, and it draws on a lot of different theories, and highly influenced by my time at the Meadows. I highly recommend Pia Melody's work, Facing Codependence, the book Facing Codependence, her book Facing Love Addiction. Um, there are a lot of different concepts that draw on a lot of different theories in that book. When I talk about codependency and childhood roles in there too, and there's some relationship mapping. And um, you know, if you're just kind of curious and wanting to just do some journaling and reflection on what are my patterns, and should I explore this a little further, and why do I keep repeating the same dynamics in my relationships or at work and with people, and it serves as a guide. And sometimes I'll give it to one of my clients, and they'll come back and we'll process it together and
Nice.
start to use it as a tool in my practice.
Great.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's such a great resource.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, where can people find you?
Well, I'm in private practice in Scottsdale here. My practice is called Spiral Up Counseling. That came from um, often sitting in group and people using the term, I was spiraling. And I consider that like a sacred spiral. It's what brought you here. And you could spiral into your bottom or into the point that brings you into getting help. And then you can also go the other direction. So, yeah, that's my practice. I'm on Psychology Today. Um, my website, I'm sure you'll link, and yeah, I'm on Instagram, TikTok,
Yeah.
all the things.
Excellent. Thank you so much for coming on today. This was a really fantastic conversation, and
Thank
I know
you.
my listeners are really going to benefit. So
Yeah,
thank you.
thank you.